Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm going to get started with my introduction. It's lovely to see people or not see them, but have them in chat. I'm Zoe. Hello. And whoop, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Zoe. I'm a library associate here at Snow Owl Libraries. Thank you for joining us for this night's program, AI and Modern Misinformation with Jason Young. Before we get started, I just have a few pieces of housekeeping info to share with everyone. Your cameras and microphones are turned off. They will remain so throughout the program. So please put your questions and comments into the chat window. Please keep conversation in the chat on topic, of course. That way we can respect each other's ability to ask questions, enjoy the program. We'll also have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the program, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. We're using the chat to share links and information with you and also to pull questions for the end of the program. Closed captioning is available during this presentation. It can be enabled by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And this event is being recorded and it'll be available on Snow Owl's YouTube channel in a week or so. So just FYI, if anybody missed or unfortunately anything happened with our tech problems, that is available. And I will get started introducing Jason. Jason Young is a researcher at the University of Washington Information School, where he is also affiliated with the Center for an Informed Public and director of the Technology and Social Change Group. His research explores the intersection between technology, knowledge, and politics. One of his recent projects focuses on developing community-based approaches to addressing misinformation. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason. I'll let you get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and thanks all of you. This is a really important topic, I think, especially right now, a topic that, a lot of people are confused about or have just a lot of very valid questions about. And so just really excited to see so many of you joining the program. And also just want to emphasize, I'm so happy to be giving this program through Snow Owl Libraries. I think libraries are such vital community partners in helping us to navigate all these changes associated with technology and kind of giving us the literacy that we need to really make good choices and filter through all the information that we get kind of bombarded with every day. So with that, I'm excited to be talking. Oh wait, hold on, sorry. All this time and I'm still bad at Zoom. I need to share my sound. Okay, try again. Excited. So hopefully y'all can see my presentation now. Excited to be talking to you all about AI and modern misinformation now. Want to give just a little bit more context about myself, just to kind of contextualize where I'm coming from as I kind of engage some of these topics around both misinformation as well as artificial intelligence. As Zoe mentioned, I'm at the University of Washington's Information School. And one of the big projects that I've been involved in or leading right now has been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. It's one of our big federal funders of research, and it's called Co-Designing for Trust. And the real emphasis of this project is on working with communities to try to build our knowledge around how to find safe information, how to find trustworthy information online. And so we've been working really hard with educators, with public librarians, with community organizations to figure out what people need right now, what people are worried about, what people are excited about, and then to design resources that really work for and with communities to be able to empower them to make good decisions as they navigate all these new sources of information and technologies. And one of the real the real inspirations or I guess causes for our project is we're really worried about the amount of bad information that people get exposed to day in and day out. And so I'm sure all of you in the audience have seen these sort of headlines these days. So all of this talk about misinformation, and by that term, I'm really referring to like information that is bad, that is false, that is maybe misleading in some way. Inaccurate, and it comes from so many places and covers so many different topics. So you hear about journalism being impacted by misinformation, science misinformation, public health misinformation. It's something that hits all age groups, all demographics. So youth are having to navigate it, elders in our communities needing more resources for it, and it's everything from very, very local all the way to international. So recent headlines kind of talking about hurricanes and the ways in which countries like China and Russia are taking advantage of these natural disasters to spread misinformation and kind of create confusion or hurt our society's cohesion in different ways. So that's really been kind of the impetus for this project is trying to figure out at a community level what do we do to equip people to navigate all of these bad sources of information. And so our project's been really fun because we get to work with really creative people in communities to really think about like not everybody. You all are awesome and great because you're willing to sit and listen to me talk for an hour and a half. Not everybody's willing to spend their evenings at a library program, and so we've had to be really creative about like what sorts of solutions can we create that are really fun and that get to people in their everyday lives in ways that they have time for. So we've done everything from work with public libraries to do a filmmaking program where we're actually working with youth to create movies where they talk about the impact of misinformation in their communities. I was just in Texas, rural Texas last week, where we were making movies around AI, and I'm going to share a little bit of the work that we did down there here today with all of you. We're working with schools to create school programs where actually, youth, students, high school students learn digital literacy, information literacy skills, and then share those with their families or go. We had one amazing event where the students went to a senior citizen center and they actually did a skill swap with seniors where the students were teaching information literacy skills. And then those seniors were actually sharing life skills back to these high school students, which was just really an amazing event. We're doing curriculum, we're doing games. One of our teams is working on board games that community members can play. And in that top left-hand corner there, working on different digital like quizzes and engagement tools to kind of get people intrigued and interested and coming into places like libraries to learn more. Along the way, this our project started really focused on misinformation, and started about 3 years ago. I think a little bit before all this hype around artificial intelligence really started to accelerate. And yet, as we've been working with communities around all of these ideas for information literacy, this topic of AI is increasingly coming up. So, all these questions on what is artificial intelligence, what can it do, and then the really critical one for our project is how does artificial intelligence and its capabilities, how is it intersecting with this phenomenon of misinformation? And in some ways, maybe it can be used as a tool for good, to kind of help people do different sorts of fact checking or engage with information in positive ways. But what we're seeing right now is a lot of bad uses, I think, of artificial intelligence, where either inadvertently or intentionally, AI can be a tool that really ramps up both the amount of misinformation that we're seeing, but also kind of makes it seem even more real in ways that are hard to navigate. And so you've probably again seen some of these headlines where people are talking about AI deepfake. So that's something I'm going to be talking about quite a bit in today's presentation. But deepfakes being, these photographs or videos or audio where AI is actually able to generate fake people or to take real people and kind of put new words in their mouths or get them to make actions that they didn't really do in real life. And so you see kind of a lot of concerns about this new form of misinformation being able to impact all factors of life. But right now, I think a lot of people really worried about what sort of implications it may have, in particular for elections. So tonight, my goal is just to share with you kind of a primer, get everybody starting to understand what is this intersection between AI and misinformation? What is the problem? That's where we're going to start. What are the sorts of misinformation that you should be aware of right now that AI is making possible? And then second, we're going to talk about what can we do about it? How do we start to filter what's real from what's not real and keep ourselves safe as we kind of try to make good decisions in our everyday lives? So starting out, this first question, what is the problem? What's this intersection between AI and misinformation? And so the problem is AI can it can tell us a lot of stuff. It can do a lot of things, but sometimes it can create bad information. It can create misinformation. Sometimes it does that by mistake. So you can have someone using AI for very good purposes. And even you in your individual lives, for example, if you go to Google and Google something, now you see that AI generated summary at the top of a Google search. Even those sorts of uses of AI, every now and then, and perhaps more often than we want, AI may include inaccurate information in its output to different types of users. So it can create bad information in a couple different ways. It can include factual errors, and so this may be the case. For example, when folks are designing AI, they are training it on data sets. So often they have these massive data sets that they're using to create these really effective artificial intelligence algorithms. And unfortunately, sometimes the data that they use to train the AI, sometimes that data is actually, includes falsehoods or inaccuracies. And so it may be the case then, if we're feeding bad data into the AI, that it may then give us that bad data back. Perhaps more problematically is sometimes, even if the data are pretty good, sometimes we see AI actually fabricate information, and this often happens perhaps when the data set is incomplete, and yet AI is trying to get us an answer even when it isn't really in that data set. And so you often hear people talk about AI hallucinations. This is kind of that phenomenon where AI may be searching to produce some sort of answer, and it just makes something up. In kind of the academic realm, I teach a lot of undergraduate students at University of Washington. One of the things we see quite a bit with some AI models is that, like, if a student is using AI to kind of get help on one of their papers, a lot of times it makes up citations. So that can be a tell sometimes, if you kind of can tell that a student may be using an AI to help them because it's making up, it's maybe it's a real author, but it's a paper that author never wrote, or a journal that doesn't actually exist. And so that can be really problematic, in that it's, this AI is just spitting something out that isn't real. And then finally, sometimes you see this kind of third category where AI is actually reporting back correct information, true information, but sometimes it's actually giving you an irrelevant response to the query that you've actually made. And so sometimes that can be a little bit deceiving for folks, because they may then misinterpret kind of what the AI is telling them. So all that is to say, like, artificial intelligence, it's very good at a lot of things, but it's far from perfect. And sometimes it just produces bad information. And we just have to kind of be aware of that, and approach it with a little bit of skepticism, or just be ready to kind of maybe double check some of maybe AI is a good starting point, but you want to do additional research as you're figuring out, is this actually the answer? Even the best AI models in recent studies, they've seen that it fabricates information about 3 to 5% of the time. So, that's still, 95 plus percent of the time it's giving you good, accurate information. But 5% is still a pretty high number. You can imagine doing 20 different Google searches in a day. One of those, maybe having a likelihood of containing fabricated information. So it's certainly, not a huge thing, but enough that everybody should be aware of it and kind of accounting for it as they decide how much trust to invest in some of these tools. And as I was saying before, there are a lot of different reasons why the technology can produce these inaccurate responses. Everything from using bad data that the algorithm is trained on or drawing from, to bad models, these kind of algorithms that computer scientists are creating, all the way to user error. Sometimes the user just isn't asking it very good prompts, and that can lead it to give worse answers than we might want. And so there at the bottom, just kind of a recent article talking about how, these hallucinations, as some people call them, like they really are part of current AI technologies in a lot of ways. Just a couple examples here. So these were recently taken off. Some Google searches, as I mentioned earlier. There's now that AI overview tool. And so one of my colleagues, did this Google search about, I don't know why, whether they just made this up or if they were genuinely having problems with cheese sticking to their pizza. But you can see, somebody has searched for, they're having a problem with cheese not sticking to the pizza that they're making. There's some good information up here at the top, like maybe you have too much sauce, maybe you have too thick of sauce. But if you keep going, you see this sentence here circled in red, starting to talk about solutions to your problem. It says you can also add about an eighth cup of non-toxic glue to the sauce to give it more tackiness. And I'm not an expert chef, but I'll tell you, I don't want to eat an eighth of a cup of glue in my pizza because the cheese is running off of it, right? And so this is an example of a terrible response that the AI has generated for whoever's doing this particular search. So that's something that's gross. I don't know how, I know it's non-toxic glue, but I don't know how safe it is to regularly consume that. And this is coming from somebody with two young children. Sometimes the responses are just kind of weird, or don't really make sense. And so you can see this query, and again, these are real queries that colleagues of mine have entered into Google. They've done a really basic search of countries in Africa that start with K. And so the response is that as of September 2021, no African country starts with the letter K, which is, not true. However, and this is where it gets even weirder, in my opinion, Kenya, which starts with a K, Kenya is the closest country to starting with a K sound as it is spelled with a K. Kenya's name comes from Mount Kenya, the country's tallest mountain. So that from a understanding standpoint, that makes no sense, right? Like it's saying no country starts with a K. Kenya almost does because it does start with a K. And so this is an example of AI producing, very inaccurate information because of the way the algorithms are kind of working in the background. So these are examples, right? There's no malintent here. It's just kind of, a deficiency, a deficit in the way that AI technology works right now. And so it's something you have to be on the lookout for. Something like this, not a huge problem, right? If you're reading this, you can kind of figure out like something's weird here, and kind of do a little bit of fact checking. Where the bigger problem, I think, comes in is that AI can also be used intentionally to produce, deceptive information and deceptive media. And in particular, these deep fakes that I mentioned earlier are something that a lot of people are really worried about. because these deep fakes, which are AI generated images, videos, or audio, like they are producing false information in the form of media that we tend to really want to believe, right? Like we tend to believe our eyes and our ears. If we see somebody say something, we tend to believe that is in fact real. And so then it becomes really deceptive when somebody's able to create a video where it looks like somebody is saying and sounds like somebody is saying something that they didn't actually say. And we're seeing all sorts of attempts to create these deep fakes, all the way from when we were talking to these high school students in Texas last weekend. They were talking about how their friends they were saying friends of theirs had made a deep fake audio recording to pretend that some boy was breaking up with some girl. So like really, really localized deception within a high school and a community, all the way up to folks making these deep fakes to impersonate celebrities or politicians or other big figures that, that can have a real impact on people's behavior. And maybe the scariest part is that it's getting easier and easier and easier to use AI technology in these ways. So you can see the photograph here. This screenshot was me last night. I just did a quick search on YouTube for AI voice cloning. So voice cloning being kind of taking somebody's voice and then being able to create new audio with their voice, getting them to sound like they're saying things that maybe they haven't said. And you can see these are the top 3 results to that YouTube search, where like I got all these results around how fast and easy and free it is for anybody to use some of these new tools to clone somebody's voice. And so I think this next slide I'm going to show you, and it's not the most convincing. My colleague questions whether this is a deep fake or what he calls a cheap fake, because it's a little bit obvious that it's been made by a robot. But just this past weekend, while we were down in Texas, my colleague down at University of Texas at Austin, he had this need to create a deepfake video that to kind of use in his class to show them what's possible with the technology. And so I'm going to show you, it's a short little video of my colleague giving a mini lecture about AI and deepfakes. But the thing you are seeing was not actually him giving this lecture. So hopefully you all be able to hear this, and then I'll talk about it a little bit.
Hi, I'm Amir, an assistant professor at UT Austin's School of Information, and this video is about helping you learn about deepfakes and how to spot them. What you're watching right now is actually a low-quality deepfake, thrown together in less than 15 minutes. It was based on just about 3 minutes of raw footage of me talking. Unfortunately, the technology to create deepfakes is rapidly evolving and getting more sophisticated, so it's becoming harder to provide tips that will always work to reliably spot them. Even low-quality deepfakes, like the one you're seeing now, can be tough to spot when you're quickly browsing content on your phone or not actively looking for signs. But if you suspect a video might be a low-quality deepfake, how do you spot it? One strategy is to pay attention to the audio and video separately. Try closing your eyes while listening to the video or muting the audio while watching it. Doing this can make it easier to spot discrepancies by focusing your attention. For example, when listening only to the audio, you might notice that the voice doesn't have the natural modulation or lilt of normal speech. Or, when watching without sound, you might pick up on unnatural eye movements. These tips are mainly helpful for less sophisticated cheap fakes that are more likely to spread in the context of local news. For example, we've heard of cases where people are posting deep-faked breakup messages to create discord in other people's relationships. In cases like that, your best move might be to simply pause and check in with the person in the video to verify if it's real. Unfortunately, it's much harder when we're dealing with news on the national level. Deepfakes that target public figures often have access to a lot of publicly available data, and those spreading them can use more advanced techniques. When we encounter video evidence related to things like election claims, the best tip might be to slow down and rely on formal media institutions and experts to verify it before acting on it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there. Hi, I'm Amir, an assistant.
Oops, sorry. Okay, so you can see that, and hopefully you can still see the PowerPoint here. It's not a very high quality deepfake, and so you can probably tell it's probably maybe harder for folks in the audience here that don't know Emmer, but like I know him, and that his voice doesn't sound at all like that. For you, it probably sounds a little bit robotic, as he mentioned. Like the voice modulations seem weird. The gestures maybe don't always match up with what he's talking about. And yet at the same time, oh, sorry, let me reshare. I'm still, after all these years, bad at Zoom. You'd think I'd get it by now. One sec. Okay, and sorry, the PowerPoint's there. It's just a white screen right now because that's what the video looks like. As I was saying, like, not the highest quality deepfake. A lot of clues that maybe excellent, thanks. A lot of clues that's AI generated, and yet like, if you were watching his lips, his mouth, they matched up pretty well with the words that he was saying. And you can imagine, like, if you're on the bus watching this on your phone, or maybe there's music in the background that's kind of covering up his voice a little bit, it starts to get a little harder to be able to tell that this is AI. The other thing is, like, this took 15 minutes to do. And it's at least good enough that I'm guessing. Can anybody in the audience through the chat, anybody want to guess what he was actually talking about there? Like when we were filming, so we did film him making those gestures, but he was talking about something different. He was talking about fast food in Pakistan, so totally different from any of the voice movements that were actually coming through that script. Yes, that's exactly right. He was able to take that video and then use AI software to basically type out a script, and then that script changed what the mouth looked like, changed the audio so that it's about a totally different topic. And so now he's able to kind of use his own AI self to do a lecture in his class.
Hi, I'm
The
Amir, an assistant professor. Hi.
The second one. So can you see the presentation now? I think the problem was the slide was just white. I'm going to show you a second clip. So this is using, somebody took a lot more time and used more sophisticated software to create an AI version of a much more famous person than Emmer, which is Morgan Freeman. So just going to show you this clip really quick.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel?
So I won't play the whole thing, but you can see in this case the next slide. You can see it much more convincing, at least in my opinion, where that voice that I was hearing right there, like to me at least, and I don't know Morgan Freeman personally, but that sounds like the Morgan Freeman I hear in movies and other things. And yet that's a video that is totally generated by artificial intelligence to put words in his mouth that he hasn't actually said. And it, it becomes much more difficult to tell. To the question, Nancy, the kind of loop, yeah, part of the issue is that with that video for Emmer, we shot only about 2 minutes of film to throw into this AI tool because it was late in the evening after a long day of community filming, and I think the lecture was a little bit longer than 2 minutes. So these are all things. Had we just spent a little bit more time, kind of putting effort into the tool, we could solve some of those more obvious kind of problems. But yeah, you can. These are great things that you're picking up on that can kind of help you start to figure out, is this AI or is this real? So that's kind of the question. Then y'all are providing me with a perfect segue. Question is like, okay, these deep fakes exist out there. Like how do we figure out if they're real or not? What are the tells? What are the techniques that we can really use to keep ourselves safe? Some of the things you're putting in the chat are great kind of potential approaches, right? Is like, are there obvious things, like this is on a loop and so clearly it's wrong? Is there some discrepancy between the mouth and the word being spoken? Some of that though, right? Like in this context of me giving you a lecture on AI, of course you're paying really close attention to the mouth and the noise and so you have kind of like heightened sensitivities to some of these things. The little warning I guess I'll share is when we're in our busy lives, not thinking automatically about AI, I think that's when some of this becomes a lot harder because we're not necessarily looking really, really closely at somebody's mouth. We're more kind of thinking about the content that's being shared, or maybe it's on our phone and we can't see it really well. But exactly what you all are starting to point to, this question of like, can we just look at it and know that it's AI, is kind of where I want to start in terms of solutions. And the answer is sometimes we can tell, and sometimes we can tell pretty easily, as in the case of the video with Emmer. Historically, a lot of the AI and other software that creates these deep fakes, they've had trouble with like specific types of imagery or matching up audio and the video in particular ways. So for example, a lot of times historically AI has had trouble when it's generating fake photographs. It's had trouble with the background, getting it. Sometimes there are weird artifacts in the background. It tends to have trouble with eyeglasses if somebody in an image is wearing glasses. Teeth tend to be a place where weird things seem to happen with deep fakes. And then hair as well is kind of often there's a tell that hair looks kind of weird. With deepfake videos, often kind of the problem is mismatches between the voice and gestures being made by the person. And so you see that if you look in like Emmer's video, like often I think the thing he was talking about, sometimes he'd get really excited and start to gesture in more wild, excited ways, but the content of what he's saying doesn't match that emotion, and so you start to see like, oh, there are these weird mismatches. Similarly, the audio might lack some of that natural inflection of a person, or feel a little bit tinny or one-dimensional. But part of the challenge, I think, is that this technology is getting better and better every day. And so kind of the technology maybe that we saw 2 years ago, some of these really clear tells, increasingly the technology we have now, it doesn't have the same problems. And the technology that we're likely to have a year from now is going to be even better. And so to illustrate that, what I want to do is show you kind of two sets of AI generated images, one from a couple of years ago, and then one from very recently. So from a couple of years ago, we have this website through the CIP called Which Face is Real, that gives folks kind of AI generated photographs and real photographs, a photograph of real person. and tries to see if you can tell the difference. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples from that first and see if you can tell which one is real, which one is AI generated. And then I'm going to show you some recent photographs from a website on the New York Times that uses much more recent technology to produce these images of fake people, essentially. And I'm hoping that as I go through these examples, we can use the chat to kind of guess which one's real and which one's fake, and see how good we are at telling what is AI generated or not. So this is my first example, and again, these are using slightly older technologies, so hopefully it's not too hard to tell. But if you in the chat can tell me of these two photographs, which one is the real one? Is it the left one? You can put left in the chat, or is it the right one that's the real person? I've seen a left, left, left. Yeah. Yep. Perfect. There, unanimously we agree. So tell me why. Why do you think that guy's fake? Everybody agrees left, and that's right. That's correct. Yeah. So the hair, there's weird stuff going on with the hair. What else? Background, yeah, there's that like weird splotch, reddish, orangish splotch. There's some weird reflections going on, and the teeth are a weird color. Yeah, a lot of really easy tells. And so there you can see, girl's a real photo. The guy that's a fake AI generated photograph. Next one. The woman on the left or the woman on the right that's real? All right, so we're a lot of lefts, but we're starting to see a little disagreement. I've got one right. So another right. So starting to get a little harder. For those of you that are saying the woman on the left, what is it? Okay, so there, thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think it's the biggest tell is this pink thing, right? If you take a close look at that, what is that, right? It's some sort of aberration in her top of her head. I guess a pink hat, but it seems like her hair kind of goes beyond it if you look really closely. So the woman on the left is real. The woman on the right is fake. Yeah, the hair's off. Here's another one. So which one's real? So I see a right. Okay, you all are good. This is great. Yeah, so somebody tell me what's going on with that one on the left. Eyes look a little bit, yeah, I mean, that's the hard part though, and we'll get into it a little bit more as we kind of transition to some of these New York Times images is sometimes this stuff is exactly right. Like her eyes look a little bit off. And so, it looks to me like her right eye is a little smaller in some ways. The other thing to keep in mind though is sometimes people just look a little bit, people aren't perfect in their features. And so could be a little bit hard. Sometimes maybe she's just squinting because the sun is in her eyes or something like that. I think the other part, yes, as some people, Nancy, you're saying, the background looks really weird. Yeah, it's like she's some sort of tree person, kind of integrating herself into nature there. Just one or two more here from these older technologies. So left or right, which one is real? I think I have found people have a little more trouble with this one. And we're a little bit split. Yeah, pretty split. So let's see what people think. Let's start with the left. For those of you that think the left one is real, what's the argument? What's wrong with the one on the right? And people are changing their mind. Okay, so teeth are a little bit off, and you can see, well, I won't get into it too much. For those of you that think the right one's real, what's wrong with the woman on the left? Lighting is a little weird. Nose is asymmetrical. Eye, so that left eye maybe is too shifted. Hair is different one side to the other. But some of these things, and that's what I'm kind of saying, like sometimes people are just having a weird hair day. In the end, the left one is the real one for this one. And I think the clear, for me at least personally, the clearest tell for this woman is most folks don't have a central tooth, right? Like it's off for me in terms of her teeth, is it seems like she has just one in the middle there. But to me, this is a little bit hard here. And it's even harder often, you all have the benefit, this is a virtual program where you have this on your own machine. I often give these examples in like a classroom setting where this goes up on a projector. The accuracy of my audience when this is on a kind of semi-good projector goes way down because the quality just isn't as good as somebody sitting right in front of, like, for those of you that may be on a laptop or a tablet, for example. Here we switch. And so this one, because of the way the New York Times website works, I don't have two next to each other. So we're going to shift the game a little bit. I'm going to show you an example of a person, and you're just going to tell me real or AI for each of these. So for this first person, do you think she is AI generated or a real human being? It's a lot of AIs. Couple reels though. All right, for those of you, so you're saying hair, well, tell me, what's making many of you think she's AI? The eyes. I hear that a lot from folks, she's too perfect or he's too perfect, like something's too perfect about them. So potentially, are we thinking that's an earring and that's off? So she's real. So most of us wrong about that one. So real human being in all her perfection or imperfection. Next one, real or AI? AI, real, yeah. All of a sudden, if you're like me, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I can't really tell. I'm just guessing. I'm just guessing. It could go either way. Anybody want to make an argument one way or the other? AI, real? Teeth aren't right. But again, maybe he just has teeth that are not perfect. Eyes too symmetrical. Yeah, so this is just a real guy with, with teeth that aren't quite perfect. So again, a lot of us got that wrong. Real or AI? And I'm noticing, right, and maybe it's just because I've done too many of these, but you're starting to slow down a little bit there in the chat, and I suspect that's because we're starting to feel like, oh, maybe we don't know. It's hard to tell. So we've flipped a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of reals. Not real. That guy's AI generated. So I'll just flip back. Some of the people, in some of the talks that I've given, some folks argue the neck looks a little bit weird going into his shirt, that maybe one side of his neck's a little higher. But again, like people aren't perfect, and so people can just look different. I'll let you look at this. Decide for yourself. We don't have to keep going in the chat. So take a look at her. Decide for yourself. So she's AI generated. And I think this is the last guy. So he's real. So I'll say, right, like, some of you are doing awesome, but like there was a huge shift, right, from those first sets of images where you all were batting nearly 100%, getting all of them correct, pretty easy to tell. 2 years later, technology is much, much, much better, and so we see that result. A lot of these photographs were pretty split in terms of whether we think it's AI or real. So it's almost to the level, right, of what we're basically guessing in a lot of senses. And so maybe still like there are ways to tell, especially if folks are making these deep fakes quickly, they're using bad, some of the lesser technologies. There's still ways to tell sometimes. But it's getting harder and harder, and it's going to keep getting harder, I think, in a lot of ways. And so maybe it's the case that we can't just rely on our own senses. Like maybe we are pretty, and myself included, like it is possible to trick us with these AI generated images at the very least, and probably those videos as well. And so my argument here tonight is I think it is possible that the technology is getting really good, but I also think that a lot of the kind of historical information literacy techniques, the sort of stuff that our librarians have been teaching us about for decades, it still works in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to give you one example, and this is a method we like to talk a lot about here at University of Washington CIP, the SIFT method. I like it a lot just because it's really, really simple in terms of giving folks just some easy steps to take when they think, hey, like this information I'm getting, maybe either like I'm not totally sure if it's right or not. Or maybe you're just thinking this is maybe some high stakes information that I'm trying to pass along to other people, and I just want to do my due diligence to make sure what I'm saying is accurate and trustworthy and truthful, so that I don't inadvertently spread something false that may change the behaviors of my loved ones, for example. And so SIFT is an information literacy technique. It's kind of a set of steps that we recommend people take if they want to kind of double check on the accuracy of some sort of information that they found online or even in real life offline. And so the letters stand for STOP. The S is stop. And the reason for this step is that a lot of times misinformation, the way it's designed to kind of activate our emotions in different ways. So that people that spread misinformation, they often know that the stuff they're spreading it's not perfect, right? A lot of times they'll spread these videos and they won't be perfect. And so one way that they can get us to not notice those imperfections is to trigger our emotions in ways that kind of override our critical thinking or our thoughtfulness, our reflectiveness. And so the first step for SIFT is to stop and kind of cool down, reflect on your emotions and where you're at, and try to take a slightly more objective, kind of distanced perspective on the information that you're interacting with. The second letter, I, stands for investigate the source. And so this is that first kind of take a look at, a lot of times nowadays, a lot of people get their information from social media. And so there's a good chance that you can kind of just take a look at like who it's come from and make a decision for yourself around, is this a reputable source? Is this even some source that I've heard of before? And that'll give you a little bit of information around like, is this super trustworthy? Like, is it coming from something I trust? In which case, okay, maybe I don't have to do too much else. Or if it's coming from an unknown place, maybe I want to move on to the F and the T. Keep doing some of this fact checking. F stands for find better coverage, and so this is what we sometimes call lateral reading. But basically, open up another tab on your browser or on your phone or wherever you're looking up the information, and try to search for this information that you found in a couple other places that you think are trustworthy. And so that may give you, if you can find, particularly if you look at a couple different sources that aren't kind of, maybe they're a diversity of ideological perspectives or just a diversity of sources. And if they all confirm that what you're seeing is true, then that may be a good indication that it is in fact true. And then finally, the T stands for trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. And so this is encouraging you, if you still have doubts, like try to really drill down and see if you can find like original reporting where maybe somebody said exactly the words that are being used in an article or something like that. So with the remaining time, just going to give you kind of an illustration of how you might use some of these technique or the SIFT technique to fact check around misinformation, and then specifically to kind of think about AI generated images and how we might fact check them a little bit. So this first example I give you, it comes from the X platform, or we always have to say what used to be known as Twitter. But comes from, or I'll read it first. So it's some sort of tweet, somebody's sharing it, that scientists have revived a zombie virus that had been trapped under a frozen lake in Russia for 50,000 years. It could pose a threat to humans. More deadly viruses could be exposed from thawing landscapes due to climate change. And then it shows this image of kind of a snowy landscape. I assume maybe it's Russia. And what really kind of makes me believe it must be true is there's even this inset of some sort of bacteria or a virus, I guess in this case. So it's giving me that science-y kind of feel to it a little bit. But maybe I'm a little cautious. And so let's kind of go through that SIFT process. The first step is stop. And so my question to all of you is this little snippet here, this social media post, is there anything about it where they're trying to activate your emotions in any sort of way? Any language they're using there that might get you to feel anything? Threat, yeah, so feel threatened. Zombie, I mean, that's the one for me. As soon as somebody says zombie, I'm thinking zombie apocalypse. Yeah, climate change. People get really, feel a lot of different ways about climate change. Deadly. I like it, pose a threat to humans. Notice it says could, but then pose a threat to humans. So you're really kind of engaged there. Yeah, climate change, Russia, along with threat. That's something that can kind of incite people. So that's that first step, is kind of to step and take a step back, stop and take a step back, and realize, hey, there's a lot of language here that's kind of trying to incite my emotions in different ways, and really trying to amp things up a little bit. The second step, so I'm thinking to myself, I've stopped, I've looked at this, it seems a little hyped. Like, is it really a zombie virus? Like, what's that supposed to make me feel? I'm then going to investigate the source. So I'm going to look up here. This came from Buzzing Pop. Does anybody in the audience think Buzzing Pop is a really authoritative source? No. Okay. Yeah. So I have no idea what Buzzing Pop is, right? No idea whatsoever. Maybe it's great. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so they have a blue check, right? That's meant to make us feel like it's authoritative, right? That it's verified in some way. But of course, nowadays you can just buy those blue checks essentially. So I agree, though, right? It doesn't feel great, and so I'm going to do a little bit more investigation. I want to do that next step, which is find other coverage. And so one thing I could do, right, is I can go to Google. And I can kind of type in maybe zombie virus or virus in Russia, climate, some sort of textual search there. I'm not going to do that though, because tonight I'm really interested in imagery and AI imagery and things like that. So just to kind of show you another technique you can actually do nowadays, this is a newer feature in Google, is you can actually upload a photograph and do your search that way. So what I'm really interested in is, hey, I don't trust Buzzing Pop. Yeah, you could research Buzzing Pop a little bit. That would be great too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if other reputable news sources are using this particular image. So I would right click on that, save that image to my computer, then drag and drop it here into Google Images. So this is what you get to if you just do images.google.com. And what that then does is it kind of gives me all the results of images that look a little bit like this particular image. And then you can actually go even further. And if you see that top left one, New York Post, that's the exact same image as the Buzzing Pop thing. Underneath the headline, it says you can click on that and see exact matches. And so if you click that, it then gives me this list of every single article indexed on Google that has used that specific image in some of its news stories. And so I'm seeing New York Post, the Hans India, Dunya News. I can't read the next one. Yard Hype. This is a list that's not instilling a lot of confidence in me in terms of seeing like really reputable kind of news sources that I would trust, and especially not a diversity of really reputable news sources. And so for me, this is an indication that like probably I've stumbled onto something that I'm not going to trust too much, and I'm not going to share with other people. You can use this same sort of approach to kind of search for other types of photographs. So here's another example where there was kind of a tweet of a missile attack by Iran into a U.S. base in Iraq. And so you can do a similar thing just from this Google search, going to about this image, and it'll pull up recent articles that have used this exact image. And so in this case, we actually see a bunch of articles that are talking about misinformation and how this particular image has been used to spread misinformation. In this case, this is an image that has been circulating around for about 4 years, and then is actually, I think, from kind of some issue in Israel and Palestine that somebody used to make to kind of represent this more recent event in Iran. But this is just to illustrate to you kind of the ways in which you have really powerful tools through Google to kind of take an image and then trace it back to its origination. And so in this case, you can kind of trace it back to that original usage, which was, back in the day, quite accurate. Skip ahead. So connecting this back to AI, you can also do similar sorts of techniques with AI generated imagery. So in this case, kind of a silly example where there are a couple different paintings, and one of these is an AI generated image. You can think to yourself which one you think is the AI generated image. But you can do a very similar technique to kind of take that imagery and pop it into Google Image. And then in this case, one of those images pops up instead of kind of any sort of search result that has to do with real paintings. Has a bunch of results that talk about AI art. You may also find another indication is if you do this sort of search on an image and nothing else comes up, that may be an indication that this is something that one individual has created and it hasn't really spread very far beyond that. Or in this case, a couple of the results are coming from places like LinkedIn or Reddit, where people share a lot of these AI generated images. That may be an indication that, hey, this first emerged on the internet in a place that doesn't feel super authoritative to me. So with that, these are just, just a little bit of a taste. Kind of my argument here is that AI, it is making misinformation worse in a lot of ways. Bad actors can use it in ways that can trick us and have impact on anything from the economy to elections to public health. The tools are getting, better and better. And yet, I argue that many of the like tried and true kind of fact-checking techniques or information literacy techniques, like if we take a step back and really start to search and look for where this information came from and whether it's coming from sources that we feel like we can trust, there's still really good techniques to kind of help us navigate these things even when they're kind of tricking our minds in different ways. So all of that is to say, like, we really need to be aware of these techniques and what they're capable of. And yet, I think it's the wrong move to kind of panic. These things aren't, they're not perfect, and there's still really good ways to navigate them. To keep ourselves safe and to keep ourselves making good decisions at the end of the day. One last thing that I just like to kind of leave people with is often one of the purposes of misinformation is really to divide us from each other. And to confuse us, to make us feel like nothing is real. And one of the things that one of my colleagues, Mike Caulfield, he actually invented this SIFT method. He likes to point out is even today, most of the information that we find online, most of it is good. And so there's still a lot of great stuff out there. And if we start to use some of these techniques to sort the good stuff from the bad, we can still kind of trust each other in a lot of ways and still work together to make our futures better. So like to end these things on kind of a hopeful note, I guess. With that, I think I've left about 10 minutes here, and happy to take any questions or comments that folks might have. I'm going to stop the share.
All right. Okay, we've got a couple interesting ones here. Okay. And one of the interesting ones I just saw pop up was someone asking if AI can be used in a reverse way to tell if something is fake.
Yeah, so they are developing different AI tools to detect like if something is AI generated. And so we even use that like in the classroom. Like one of the things we're grappling with, right, as teachers, is students are using all these tools. And so, there's all these concerns around like, can we even assign papers, essays anymore, or are students just kind of generating them using AI? And so that's one market, right? Is now they have AI tools that can help teachers tell, like, is my student generating their paper through AI? And there's similar things that are created for images and other sorts of things. So yeah, that stuff exists, and it is possible to sometimes use those tools to tell if something's fake or not. The caveat that I would provide is one, like those tools are still not perfect, so they still hallucinate. They still have inaccuracies, so you can't rely on them 100%. Secondly, it's a little bit of an arms race, right? Where the technologies that are producing the fake information, deep fakes, they're getting better and better. And so the technologies that detect them have to get better and better and better. And so it's kind of a question of, which one's ahead and how well can the solutions keep up. And so that's why I kind of like to stress these like tried and true method. Like SIFT is a method folks have been using it for a really long time, and it still works even though the technology's gotten really, really good. Like these techniques still work. And so for me, like those critical thinking approaches, that's my first line of defense. Like absolutely use some of these other tools too, but human mind's really powerful to figure stuff out.
Yeah, somebody else brought up an interesting point about, say, you're someone who, you know, deals with like a vision issue you know, or might be somewhat deaf and you're seeing one of these AI generated videos. Has it been shown that like you might have to be more careful or is there, are there like anything, just really focus in on the one that you do have a strong connection to?
In terms of like what sense you might be using to kind of detect if am I understanding the question right?
Guess so. Yeah, sort of. Is it harder if you're, like if I, is it harder if you might have some deafness in your ears to be able to tell if something's, like to be able to ID like a deep fake AI generated voice or,
Yeah, so yeah, it's a really great question, and this is another, this is another one of those areas where we really need more research around how, different types of people may experience AI and be more or less vulnerable to it. I can imagine, you know, folks being both more and less vulnerable in some ways. So, like we mentioned, some of these approaches to kind of thinking about these videos, some of them rely on multiple senses, and like part of the weakness of these AI tools may be that they're bad at matching the audio to the visual perfectly. And so, if we only have audio or we only have one sense to rely upon, we not be may not be able to do that like matching to kind of match them together and see that that's the fault. At the same time, one of the techniques that my colleague Emmer mentioned is like sometimes it can be helpful actually to just look at it visually or just listen to it, and you may then be able to pick up on things that you would otherwise miss if you were both looking and listening. And so other things may open up to you if say you're just looking at it or you're just listening to it. Other sorts of tells may emerge for you. But I think you're definitely picking up on a, like this is an important area that we need to understand a lot better.
for sure. And I would also encourage people like, I think we did, me and my colleagues at one of the libraries went through one of the Can You Tell videos that CIP had created. And at some points, we had to ask each other and get another person's set of eyes on it. It was really helpful to be able to discuss it with the person. So don't be afraid to be like, I could be wrong, right? Discussing it with someone can be really helpful.
Yes. I'm a community-based research. My research is all about people. There's power in people, and power in people coming together. And part of the problem is we're often we find emotions get in the way a lot, around kind of fact checking and talking about this stuff. And that makes it harder to tell. So the more you talk to others, critically about this stuff, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, and then another thing that's coming up is like if someone does come across an AI inaccuracy or something like that, what is the responsible thing to then do there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to. So one, I definitely wouldn't share it. Don't share it. That's, I think the baseline thing, right? We don't want it to keep going. I think there are different approaches. Like, it really depends on context. So, it could be like maybe it is a family member that shared that with you. And in that case, depending on your relationship with that person, it could be useful to kind of be like, hey, like I noticed you shared this, like here's some proof that it's AI, or engage them in some. Generally, we recommend like a positive way, right? You're not trying to call them out and say they've done a horrible thing. You're trying to engage them positively. So that could be useful. It was some random person on Facebook, and you're just going to start some big political war on Facebook. Like that may not be worth it. To correct everything that's wrong on the internet is often kind of a fighting battle. And so, so you have to kind of use your judgment a little bit to decide what the appropriate thing is to do.
Yeah, and we're all able to fall for stuff like this. So definitely like when you're engaging with someone who might have gotten duped into something, being like, look, I've been there too, can be really good rather than, yeah, that sort of calling in. I have someone who's saying, they've got, it seems like, you help make it seem more manageable, but do you have any tips for like loved ones who maybe are struggling with that stop part of the SIFT method?
Yeah, I would actually, and maybe I can, Zoe, maybe I can provide a pointer to some colleagues of mine. We have at University of Washington, we have another project called they just changed their name. They used to be called ART, and they've been working on exactly this problem, specifically particularly on like social media. Like if you have loved ones that you notice are spreading misinformation a whole bunch, and maybe are really passionate about it, like they don't really want to hear you like tell them, "Hey, sift." They've been working on techniques to kind of initiate conversations with folks. I'll also do a plug, and I forget the date, but we are going to be doing this is a series, and so I think our last talk here with Snow Isle Libraries is around. I think the prompt, Zoe, you had given us was kind of like, how do we talk to people around the Thanksgiving table that may be spreading misinformation amongst the family or something like that. And so
Yeah,
I
that's on the 24th, so October 24th.
So next week, my fantastic colleague Stacy will. So I don't want to steal her thunder and dive into that, but
Well,
she's
and these will be available online afterwards for people. So if you think someone would find it helpful, you can definitely redirect them to Snow Owl, YouTube channel and whatnot. It's a really great gift that CIP is giving us and making these available for longer than just a single program. Um, it said, let's see, I've got maybe I think we could do one more here and then we'll wrap it up. Um, someone's asking. You know, is there a way to determine maybe which AI apps are providing more accurate or trustworthy information?
Yeah, I'm not. So they're like so that stat that I provided, that like 3 to 5%. That was basically me kind of digging up what we see a lot of times is it's AI researchers. We've got a lot of great folks at University of Washington that do this research that kind of have to end up auditing these different technologies to figure out how accurate they are. Unfortunately, not all the companies are always super transparent all the time, and so I think it's kind of an ongoing field of research to kind of figure out like how to direct people. So I can try to follow up with some of my colleagues. I'm not aware of lists that kind of rank AI tools and things like that, but it is possible that sort of thing exists. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we've come across any. Of course, we're usually a little behind you guys, but mostly just not getting the data itself from AI, but being able to find it somewhere else, and yeah, being able to confirm it like multiple different ways, as said, interactions as well. And so, huge thank you to Jason for this evening. And also, thank you to everyone for listening to this presentation. Be sure to check the Snow Owl website for more online events. We've got the rest of this program series coming up. So, next week we have Learn to Discern Health Information with Liz Krause, and on Tuesday, October 22nd, and then on Thursday, October 24th, we have Facts Not Fighting, How to Talk About Misinformation with Stacy Wedlake. both part of Jason's incredible team, and we're really, really happy to have the chance to work with them. So have a great night. We hope to see you again soon.